curious, engaging. To understand the modern wealth of Singapore, you have to look at this exact same footprint in 1959. Back then, the skyline wasn't a forest of glass and steel. It was a chaotic patchwork of muddy stilt house kampongs and decaying shophouses. Living conditions in these squatter settlements were brutal. Homes were built of wood and palm fronds, creating constant fire hazards and offering zero sanitation. In the city center, old shophouses were partitioned into cubicles so small that laborers rented single mattresses by the shift, one man sleeping while the other worked. This data shows the two-sided crisis the island faced at independence. One line shows unemployment spiking well above 10%. The other shows a total absence of natural resources. No land for farming, absolutely no oil, and no minerals. The government realized that simple policy tweaks could not fix a vacuum of this scale. National survival required an aggressive intervention. They would have to simultaneously engineer where their citizens lived and exactly where they worked. Because passive growth was mathematically impossible for a resource-poor island, an artificial, state-driven master plan became the only viable path to survival. The first step was breaking the back of the housing crisis. In 1960, the government established the Housing and Development Board, or HDB. In a matter of years, the state orchestrated a massive physical transition, pulling thousands out of fire-prone slums and into structured, permanent concrete blocks. Moving from a temporary shock to a permanent government-backed flat changed the population's outlook. For a community of transient settlers, this physical stake in the land created a shared sense of rootedness in the new nation. But while the housing was stabilizing, the economy was hitting a wall. Early attempts to protect domestic industries weren't working because Singapore's internal market was simply too small to sustain its own growth. However, the success of the housing program had demonstrated that state-driven planning could solve even the most desperate social problems. This achieved a level of social stability that allowed the government to pivot toward their most radical economic experiment yet. In 1966, the Economic Development Board pivoted to an export orientation, opening the economy to foreign direct investment. To win over multinationals, they offered pioneer status, a massive tax holiday, allowing firms to operate tax-free for 15 years. The strategy worked. Foreign factories, like this textile mill, flooded the island, absorbing the massive unemployed workforce into labor-intensive manufacturing. By the early 1970s, the plan had created over 147,000 jobs. The crisis had completely flipped. Singapore moved from mass unemployment to a severe labor shortage. Instead of slowing down, the government entered Phase 3, industrial restructuring. They began manipulating incentives to deliberately phase out the very low-skill manufacturing they had just finished building. The Economic Development Board courted high-tech industries, forcing the workforce up the technological learning curve. Assembly lines were replaced by computer-driven production and precision engineering. This is the core anomaly of the Singaporean model. The state used heavy-handed government planning to perfectly exploit the competitive forces of global capitalism. By the mid-1980s, the government recognized that manufacturing alone wouldn't be enough. They initiated Phase 4, economic diversification. This era saw the deliberate expansion into highly lucrative sectors, not just manufacturing, but aerospace, biotechnology, and international financial services. The modern result is a capital-intensive global hub. A population that once lived in wooden shacks now operates some of the most advanced trade and shipping infrastructure on the planet. This growth was underpinned by two constants. The state maintained absolutely open trade policies, combined with strict macroeconomic stability. Singapore remains a unique case study in economic history, a nation that pulled itself from a slum to a global powerhouse by executing a ruthless and pragmatic master plan.